Welcome back to the Forge. Today we're going to be making a trammel, an adjustable length hook that's often used over campfires. For this project we'll be using a length of 20mm by 5mm bar and a length of 8mm round. Today we'll need the round punch that we made last episode, a round drift. They're like a punch but made of mild steel, not heat treated and used for widening holes. Try making one by yourself. And something to cut steel with. First step is to take our flat bar and put a set down in at 1.5 inches. We lower our holding hand to just below the level of the anvil and hammer so our blows drive the corner of the anvil into the metal. Once we've established the set down, we turn 90 degrees and flatten it on the face of the anvil to avoid swelling the top and the bottom and creating a cold shut down the centre. We then draw it out to the length and thickness desired. I went a little thin on this one. I think I'd recommend taking it down to around 8mm square. Next, we'll octagonalise this piece by knocking the corners off it. When it's an even octagon, we'll then roll it under the hammer, hammering gently into the lower heats to planish it off and give us a nice even round section. Then we'll put a taper on the end and also round this off, much like we did for the round punch, but in miniature. We're now ready for putting the scroll on the end. Little scrolls like this can be used to finish all sorts of ironwork. I use them all the time, on handles of pokers and the end of hooks, so it's a really useful skill to learn. Using a fairly sharp corner of the anvil, we use the hammer in a brushing motion just on the corner of the anvil, shown here. We then sneak the metal forwards, repeating the brushing motion until it almost turns back on itself. I'm doing this in one heat, but if you want to take your time, this is the point where you can put it back in the fire. Put it with the point facing upwards to avoid overheating and burning the end. Taking it over to the face of the anvil, we use more brushing motions to continue rolling the scroll over. But then we pay special attention to the end of the scroll to ensure that it's bending over too. Otherwise you end up with a folded end like a paperclip rather than an even scroll. At this stage we can start the loop on the end of the trammel. Counterintuitively, the first step is to bend the tail in the opposite direction so that the loop sits in the centre of the trammel rather than looking like a number 9. When we wrap the loop around, we don't want to damage the scroll, so we cool that off to protect it. We take it over to the horn and bend it around, careful not to hit where the metal is in contact with the horn, since we just want to shape it, we're not trying to forge it. If yours comes out looking all wonky, like this example, that's okay. Using the horn can take some practice. We'll go through rectifying it. First step is to cool the scroll again. It can be a little tricky to dip this in water when it's this shape, so you can spray it with a little squirt bottle for precision cooling. Then we head back to the horn. To even up the curve, hook it onto the horn and look for air gaps between the horn and the metal. Gently tap these air gaps while moving your holding hand up and down to remove them. If you find your loop is looking lopsided and looks like a number 9, hit the main bar while the loop is hooked onto the anvil and it will move the loop upwards. When our loop is even and centred, we're going to move on to punching the holes in our trammel. I measured out and centre punched little marks for my holes so they were nice and even. If you don't have a centre punch, then doing them by eye is fine. We'll get everything we need for punching ready. Our punch, some punch coolant, this is beeswax but grease or oil works just as well, a glove for holding the punch, and of course, our hammer. Holding between my legs frees up my hands for punching. We punch down, removing and cooling the punch between blows, until we're most of the way through and we can feel the anvil resisting more punching. Then we flip it over, find the cold mark where we were punching through from the other side, set our punch and punch through until out pops that little slug. Next we want to widen our hole, so we take it over to the pritchel hole in our anvil and drive our drift through to widen it. Because the pritchel is quite a lot bigger than the hole we're drifting, the material is pushed down into it, so I keep flipping it to negate this. Drifting will rob heat from the bar, so do this a little at a time and reheat to avoid tearing the hole. If you want, you can make yourself a bolster plate, like this one, with different sized holes in it to support the hole better while you're drifting, which will leave less scarring than just using the pritchel hole. Then we can go ahead and punch and drift the rest of the holes in the bar until finally it looks like this. Then we'll cut off just below the final hole and file the corners to neaten it up. Finally on this piece we'll put a bend in just before the bottom hole. We'll take it to the far side of the anvil and then line the edge up with where we want to bend and strike down, removing any incidental bend on the face of the anvil and then back off the edge, a process we repeat until we have a nice clean 90-degree bend. At this point, this part of the trammel is forged, and we can start on the hook. First step is to put a round taper and a scroll on the end, exactly like we did for the loop. If you want a reminder of how to do that, just rewind a bit. By the magic of video fast forward, we have a scroll. Then we're going to shape this into a hook. This is very similar to shaping the loop on the top of the trammel, but with an incomplete loop. Next, I cut off my material a couple of inches longer than the distance between the top and bottom holes of the trammel, as measured from above the hook. Then, without sounding like a broken record, I put a round taper and a scroll on the other end. This will form the part which hooks onto the trammel. Once this end has a scroll too, we'll put an angular bend in it with the scroll on top. This gives us something that looks like this, which we can test to ensure it easily hooks onto the holes in the trammel. If, like this, they don't fit, it's too steep an angle. To remedy this, we can take it over to the horn of the anvil and strike down on the bend where there is a gap underneath, to open up that bend and then test it again. When the pieces fit together, warm them up in the flames over the fire and then apply beeswax to the outside to give them a bit of moisture resistance and a nicer finish. I'd often wire brush before applying beeswax, but I'm trying to keep the tools needed here to a minimum. Here we have our finished trammel, and we'll give it a quick test by hanging it from my door. Yep, that seems to do the job. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider a like and subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. If you'd like to give extra support to the channel, please consider becoming a Patreon, link below, like these lovely people scrolling past now. Have a great day.